Okay, well, this is Ed Peterson, EFT therapist and supervisor from Salt Lake City, Utah. Here with my dear friend and colleague, Dr. Scott Woolley. Hi, Scott.
Hello, glad to be here.
Oh, well, great to have you here. Again, folks, this is an episode of a relatively new vlog and podcast that I've put together called Therapy, Emotion, and Sex dash conversations that matter. And so we'll probably talk a little bit about all of those things. So let me just say again, this is I am so excited, Scott, because I'm lucky in that this is the second time that you've come on this show and been willing to talk with me. Again, I'm going to say a little bit about you, Scott, and then please tell our listeners a little bit about yourself. Scott is a very, very seasoned and experienced EFT and attachment therapist, teacher, professor, researcher, one of the really early people that started working with Dr. Sue Johnson many decades ago, and really what I would say refining EFT or in emotionally focused therapy. Scott lives and practices in San Diego, Alliant University. Yeah, so much more I could say, but Scott, is there anything else you want to say about you?
No, that's fine. I mean, I've been in practice for a long time, over 30 years, and I have also done a lot of international training, over 100 international workshops. That's the only thing I'd add.
Right,
So, and a lot of them actually have been around the topic that we're going to discuss today, affairs.
Yes. Okay. Well, let's jump into that. So yes, the topic of affairs, infidelity, relationships. So just to start out, maybe Scott, you could just start out with talking a little bit about, from the attachment frame and from the perspective that we have as EFT or emotionally focused therapy therapists. Tell us about what you think about and how you begin even sort of talking about or understanding affairs.
Okay. Affairs obviously involve a violation of the commitment and the kind of basic rules of the relationship. So all couple relationships have, as a part of them, exclusivity. And usually that exclusivity is kind of sex and romance. Okay, we keep the sex and romance in our relationship. Obviously, there are some relationships where they have an agreement to allow sex outside of the relationship. And it's rare, but sometimes you'll see romance out too, but usually not. But the way I would define affairs or infidelity is it's a violation of that agreement, a violation of the exclusivity, which helps make a couple a couple.
Right. Interesting.
So,
and I'm just writing that down, the word violation and exclusivity. Right. And so, for me as a couples and family therapist and an individual therapist, when I hear you say what you just said, Scott, it makes me think about the idea that if there's been a violation, if there's been an affair, that it's a violation, and we're using that word because one person or two people or even a family had certain expectations, right? Or certain rules around how we behave what's acceptable, right?
Mhm.
And then that idea of that there's going to be exclusivity, right? I love that word, because what the exclusivity brings up for me, Scott, is what I would go to are some key attachment needs that we all have.
Mhm.
And one of them is emotional safety.
Yes.
And I would say emotional trust. And so maybe talk about that idea of the exclusivity, right? That kind of agreement, maybe a contract that people have, that we're going to keep this for us, right?
Right.
And how that, in your mind, connects to this deep, deep need for safety and for trust that all of us, it almost seems like we have at a DNA level.
Yeah. Well, we absolutely, as you say, all have that need at a deep level to have safe, bonded, connected relationship
Yeah.
or relationships. But having a particularly safe, bonded relationships, being in love is a vulnerable experience, which means for any kind of vulnerability, you need to have some safety around that.
Mm.
If you or people get scared and they pull away. Sexuality, unless you are numbing out, sexuality is also a vulnerable experience.
Hmm.
And consequently, I mean, if you're having sex with somebody, there's almost always some possibility, for example, of pregnancy,
Right.
but not always, because with LGBT couples, that isn't always the case. With older couples, for example, that may not be the case, but there's also the chances of sexually transmitted diseases, etc. And so there's a certain amount of vulnerability involved. And one of the kind of functions of having those rules or agreements,
Mhm.
and for people who marry, having it be a legal agreement, is to try and create enough safety to be able to truly be emotionally vulnerable and intimate in the experience of loving and also sharing their bodies with each other.
Right. You see, wow, that makes me think of a lot of things. And even feel some things here, but you're so right. And when you said that, that love and relationship by its nature, those things are vulnerable, right? I think a lot of people, a lot of us don't realize that early on when we're teenagers and we're young, or even young marrieds. And there's hormones and there's so much this and that. And it seems so natural to just jump into relationships, and even the sexual experience for lots of people early on, if there's a lot of hormones, can just seem like just the most smooth sailing, just the most natural thing ever, right? But I think part of
Although most people don't, by the way, in their early when they're young, but yes, it can be.
right, exactly, and that's a really good point. I guess the thing that just got me thinking is there is a certain vulnerability
Mhm.
to the love relationship, and so once two people almost maybe get the emotional courage up to even to commit to each other,
Mhm.
it just in a relationship, it could be by saying that they're married, or just by um committing, that you're right, though there's so much vulnerability in that. And especially for people who may come from more of either a somewhat anxious attachment
Mhm.
uh, profile, or be more anxiously attached, or people who are more avoidant, or even people who have more of a complex and disorganized attachment, right?
Mhm.
So maybe you could talk about that a little bit, which again is also, Scott, giving our listeners who may not be EFT, right, who may not be in the emotionally focused therapy world. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that, about how you see maybe how people who maybe lean more to the anxious side or lean more to the avoidance side, right? How that could play into one, an affair happening, and then also how people feel and how people try to deal with it when, finally the affair comes to light, and if they decide to try to heal, right?
Mhm. Absolutely, yes. Well, the more insecure a person is in general, the more that I shouldn't say maybe the more likely they'll have affairs, but people who have affairs generally are insecure. And whether they are avoidant or whether they are anxious or, disorganized, in that insecurity, secure people, if you think about it, when in all relationships, there are difficult times, there are minor betrayals,
Right.
minor disappointments. Healthy couples are very good at repairing those. They're
Hmm.
very good at finding their way back to emotional connection. Okay. The more insecure people are, the harder that is oftentimes to be able to find their way back. And the easier it becomes, because we all do want emotional connection, to, in certain types of affairs, start finding that with somebody else. Um, New love is very powerful. There are a lot of affairs that don't involve romance,
Right.
but a lot do. And a lot of times those affairs that do, um, it is an escape. It
Hmm.
is sometimes trying out a new relationship.
Right.
It is typically oftentimes about trying to feel loved and valued, where in the primary relationship, they don't feel that way.
Right.
Typically, they don't feel that way because they've had difficulty in effectively coming back together when the challenges of life, the storms of life hit them. And rather than kind of holding on tight, they end up having difficulty finding each other and comforting each other and whatnot.
Right. You see, that makes me think just of two different couples that I was working with last month. And on this show, we will always change some names, or we're not going to give names, but we will change some details and make sure that we're
Right.
holding.
Could have been 2 years ago and then instead of 2 months ago, right?
Right. Exactly. But we're going to make sure that we safeguard the confidentiality of our clients. But here's something that I have seen, and this is, again, I've seen this many times, is that one type of couple that will land in my office are the couple who are doing premarital counseling. And whenever I get that phone call, I am very happy. I do what I call my therapist backflip, because I get so excited when I see people in the early stages of the relationship who want to come in and they want to learn skills and they want to develop a connected, safe bond, and they want to start their relationship in the best way possible, right?
Mhm.
And that's a very interesting experience. And again, this was a while back that I was working with that couple, and then I was also same day working with a couple working through a very difficult affair.
Mhm.
And let's just say, change a few things, but this was a couple that had been together approximately 15 years,
Mhm.
had some children,
Mhm.
um, really did have a lot of love for each other at one time.
Mhm.
And in this case, and this has been with like a lot of couples, one of the partners was dealt with depression
Mhm.
and was very depressed off and on for years.
Mhm.
And in that depression, that partner withdrew and was no longer interested in an intimate sexual relationship. It really wasn't really able to. This person was trying to get better, taking meds, doing what they could, but they dealt with major depression, and it was a big hit to their romantic and sex life, right?
Mhm.
And so within a few years, the other partner met someone at work, and within 6 months or so had started an affair. And when that affair came to light, that's when they landed in my office.
Right. Right.
And they were at that stage, it had come to light a week or two before. And I got that phone call sort of in distress, right?
Mhm.
It was actually the phone call from the partner who was betrayed, not the one who did the betraying. And they showed up in my office. And in the first session, it was very clear that they both, even though they weren't sure if they could, that they both wanted to try to save their marriage.
Yeah.
And even though the affair wasn't, well, it had been over for 2 weeks, but hadn't really been ended, that the partner engaging in the affair stated that he or she did want to put that away and wanted to come back to the marriage, right?
Mhm.
It was so interesting, Scott, because I had this just contrast, right, of this couple in sort of the kind of naive early stages of not even married yet, had been together for a year and wanted to work on their relationship, and they were so open, and it was just, it was just mostly just love and light would walk in with them, right? and
Mhm.
and then the couple in the grips of such a tough thing, right?
Mhm.
And so maybe you could do this from the little information that I gave you about the couple with the affair, right? Tell us about, from a therapist standpoint, how would you be thinking about that couple? What would you be asking them? How would you sort of start treating that couple that was coming to you saying, oh my God, this is what just happened. The bomb just went off in our relationship.
Mhm.
How would you start to work with them?
Well, I think one of the first things is making sure that the affair has ended.
Yeah.
Okay. And figuring out how, just making sure it's ended and stopped, and it doesn't restart again.
Right.
Okay. Um, there's certainly a lot of work that you would do to just assess exactly what went wrong. Okay. Um, and there's a lot of work on this, but one of the questions in assessment is going to be trying to figure out how this happened in the first place.
Mm,
And how to contain it. There's a lot of containing that needs to happen because usually people are so traumatized and so hurt.
right.
And the person who didn't have the affair, the betrayed person, was usually very traumatized. And in this case, it sounds like that partner was also sick and fighting, for severe. And how could you abandon me when I needed you the most?
Right.
How could you step away from me when I needed you the most? Right. So that's massive. That is going to create deep, deep wounds. For the other partner, typically affairs involve a violation also of one's own kind of moral value system.
Mhm.
And so if, I really haven't met people who have, at least I've seen in my practice, where people say, oh, I think it's just fine. They'll justify what they did.
Right.
Okay, they'll justify it. But usually they'll say things like, I don't know, 5 years ago, I couldn't have imagined I'd be in this place. And I thought people who did this to their families were scum. And now I did it, right? So it involves that violation. Typically, there's a lot of shame, and shame ends up being another block to reconnection and healing. So you have to understand that. Typically with affairs, they're going to need to develop a coherent and realistic narrative around how this happened and why it's not going to happen again. Okay.
Well, let me just make sure, let me repeat that, because that's so important, because I can just imagine, Scott, that there are therapists watching this who may be thinking, okay, I want to really take some practical ideas away from this this video. And you just said two key things that together with the couple, that you would need to get to understanding why this happened. And I think you said why it won't happen again.
Right. And it's really kind of how I think about it in terms of how it happened, why it happened, what was driving this affair or the affairs, and why is it not going to happen again? And what kind of things are going to be put in place. And typically, if you don't understand why it happened, it's hard to come up with a plan to not have it happen again.
Right.
Okay. And so people will say, I don't know why I did it. I remember one person saying, I guess I just got selfish. I got selfish, and so I did it. I knew it was wrong, and I did it anyway. Well, what's the problem with that? And then he would go on and say, and I'm very sorry, because I know I hurt you, and I hurt our family, blah, blah, blah.
But it's sort of like, yeah, I made a mistake. I'm human. Yep, I did, and I'm very sorry.
And the problem with that is what's going to keep it from happening again? You can have all the sorrow in the world, but if you don't understand what was driving it in the first place, it's going to be difficult for you to be able to come up with any kind of coherent plan. That tends to be very important. I do tend to think about affairs in terms of what drives them, in terms of the motives, as I put them into kind of three categories, and there are overlaps in these. But one I would call relational dynamics. There are serious problems in the relationship. And sometimes they are affairs where someone's trying to manipulate the other person, or somebody's kind of escaping the distress in the relationship, or they're protesting. Well, that's one. The second one is escaping life. Okay. It's escaping the stresses of life. And that's usually coupled with not necessarily a terrible relationship, but oftentimes it isn't a close relationship, because people who have close relationships tend to turn to each other for escape rather than going outside. But you'll see this. And again, there can be some overlap. The third one is really being driven by intrapsychic issues. Okay. You'll have people who have trauma, people who, for example, have a lot of disconnected kind of one-night stand types of affairs. Oftentimes have gender issues. They've been deeply hurt. Men tend to oftentimes have father issues. You got to work with that. Compulsive affairs, the types of affairs where people, it's like they fit into the sex addiction. Oftentimes that's about, numbing out, not knowing how to deal with the pain of life. And it can be, I put that under intrapsychically driven affairs. So there's various things, but if you have a sense of what is kind of drove it, you can orient your therapy around it, because it's not just about repairing the relationship, although that's incredibly important. And there's a lot of work to help the betrayed partner heal. It's also, it's going to be really hard for that person to heal if they're terrified, or if the person keeps having affairs, right? So what's driving, what drove it? What's going to prevent it?
So, yes. So I want to do something that we did last time. I want to jump into a role play.
Okay.
And I would like you, Scott, to be the therapist.
Okay.
And let's use my example. And boy, this is not just one couple. I've dealt with this many, many times. And so this is not anything specific to any one couple. And I'll actually just make up a couple of details. Like I told you, let's just say this is the couple where it is actually the husband who has been suffering with depression for 4 or 5, 6 years. It was the woman, the wife, the partner who.
And are these going to be married couple?
Yes,
That's
married couple. They're married for about 15 years. Yep, heterosexual, about 45 years old. She ended up having an affair with a man from her work. And they have a couple of kids, 8 and 15, let's say. They're in your office, and let's say that we're maybe in session 2 or so. And so it's not major crisis. They aren't yelling and screaming at each other right now, but they're in their office, and you're just trying to sort of gather information about what happened, right? And you're trying to do what you just said, which is start the work around understanding what happened, and then understanding what actually, how could this, what would have to be in place for this not to happen again. Okay, so I'll just be the, we'll start when I'll just flip back and forth. I'll be the man, then I'll be the woman, and I'll start here with I'm the woman who is the betrayer. I'm the one who did the affair. Just say, Scott, yeah, I mean, I'm here today, and I feel terribly. To be honest, I'm still not sure how it happened. I got caught up in this thing. It started out pretty, I wasn't planning on this turning into an affair. I just, started talking with this man. He was a good listener. Then it was going out for a drink, and it got away from me, Scott, and I feel terrible about it. I'm sitting here, with my husband, and I feel it's kind of like this. Like I used to think that people, maybe I still do, that people who do what I did are complete scum and losers. And I could never have imagined this happening to me.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess part of what I'd say is that's the case with lots of people. Okay. And I know that this must have resulted in huge amounts of inner turmoil for you.
Yeah.
Because this is a huge kind of violation of your own kind of value system.
Oh yeah, I would have never would have thought that I could have done this. I mean, it's against my religion.
Yeah, it's against your religion, it's against your value system, and you felt at times very bad, right? I guess I would be, and you still feel bad. I hear that, and I can see it. And now you're seeing the impact on your husband.
And I do, and I know it's only been 2 weeks, but I really do. I'm done with that thing, and I'm going to do really what I can. I want to save this marriage.
You want to save the marriage. You don't want to lose this man because you do care about this man. Is that right?
I do.
Your husband.
Yes, I feel terrible. I do care about him.
And
I especially feel terrible because he's been so depressed and so not well. And what a time for me to do what I did.
Yeah. I think it's important that we kind of figure that out. Okay. And Before I go there, I just want to ask, has all contact ended with your affair partner?
Yes. Contact has ended. Um, Blocked on my phone. No more. I mean, deleted his contact stuff. I don't work in the same office with him. It's the same company, but it's not the same office. I don't see him. I don't have a need to. And I told him that there will be no more contact and that it's done.
Mhm. Yeah, right. So, okay, that's good. That's good. Okay, and you're determined to stay with that,
Yes.
right? Because you want to fix this. Let's go back to, okay, first it was you just kind of got talking and whatnot. My guess is that early on, at some point, red flags started going up in your head. It's like, oh, this is getting a little closer. I might be enjoying this too much, or maybe I'm sharing too much. What? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah. Yeah. I think it was actually pretty early into it. Because it was this, is an acquaintance, kind of a friend of a friend, and it was at a company, it was like a company barbecue
Mhm.
about a year ago. And yeah, we just sat there and started talking. And what really happened was we both started kind of downloading and talking about the problems in our marriage.
Mhm.
And I found myself just sharing a lot. He was very understanding, and it seemed
Mhm.
very innocent. And but if I'm really honest, I think I walked away from that conversation feeling a little bit uncomfortable, but yet I liked it because I felt like I was getting something off my chest that I hadn't been able to talk to about anyone, about
Mhm.
just about how things had been so cold between myself and my husband for so long, and that I had felt so lonely. And he really listened.
He really listened. He really listened. And you felt things had been so cold. It sounds like you were kind of starving for real connection, which you used to have with your husband, but you had lost. Is that right?
I would say, yeah. I mean, he and I were talking about this, but I think we would both agree, at least I would say it's been probably 8 years since we were really regularly having sex, but also just doing the romantic things that we used to do.
Yeah. So it's been like 8 years since you guys have been emotionally and physically bonded and connected.
Yeah, I mean, we would,
Close.
still, it would happen once in a while, but yeah, and especially because in the early part of our marriage, that was such a big part. It was such a strong part of our relationship.
Sex was.
Sex and just romance, going out and having fun together.
Good. Yeah. Right. Right. And so, you know, it sounds like it had been a long time. And needing connection, it's something we all need. Okay. Having connection, having, safe, loving connection is important for all of us. And it's almost like you were kind of starving for it a bit. And, it's like you'd been on a diet of kind of very minimal food in that area.
Yeah.
And you were hungry. And this other guy comes along and kind of starts offering you a lot of food. But the problem is maybe, I don't know, ice cream or something like that. And it started tasting really good. All right.
And so, Scott, let's pause for 1 second. So here's the curveball that I'm going to throw you as a therapist. Okay. As we're doing this, the partner, right? The husband, let's just say that he interjects right here and says, whoa, hold on, Scott. I mean, this all sounds so nice, like my wife here, like she, was needing this thing and wasn't getting it. But I mean, come on. I mean, I'm sitting over here and it just feels like, it doesn't even feel like you're talking about it, like that you did anything wrong.
Right, yeah. So let me address that one for a minute, because that's really important.
Yeah.
Okay. In figuring out why this happened, it does not mean it was okay. There are healthy ways to meet needs and there are unhealthy ways. So in many ways, she did feel starved, it sounds like. And this guy was starting to give her ice cream, so to speak, and which you two used to enjoy.
Yeah, but she could
But
have
the
come in,
pro-
she could have come and talked to me.
Exactly. That's exactly right. Yep, exactly. And so the key is that she was stealing it.
Yes. Okay. I'm
You,
glad someone said that.
you're
Yes.
stealing it. She was stealing it. Okay. Rather than saying, hey, I want to connect with you. Let's enjoy the ice cream. Let's open the refrigerator and have ice cream together. Right.
Because I know,
Instead,
because Scott,
she was stealing.
I know I've been depressed and all of that, but
Mhm.
it's not like I've been dead.
Right. No. And let me say something to you as well that I think is really important. This is not your fault.
Hmm.
Okay? People oftentimes get very caught up in whose fault it is that this happened. But the truth of the matter is that you, in the end, are responsible for your own behaviors. And so is she. You didn't put a gun to her head and say, you have to go out and have an affair. You didn't do that. And she was, her needs may not have been fully met, but she was alive. She wouldn't have died. Okay. And particularly no sex. You don't have to have sex to be alive. Okay.
Well, it makes me feel better to hear you say that.
But you're not responsible for her having an affair. And when I say, turning to the wife, when I say you're responsible for your own behaviors, I am not saying you're a horrible, terrible, bad person. What you did was bad and very destructive, right? And you know that, but that's not who you are. Yes, you are responsible. But if you get caught up in I'm a terrible, bad, horrible person, it's going to be very difficult to heal this.
Okay, great. So let's time out. So, wow, that's terrific. Boy, I could feel that, Scott. I could feel myself dropping into the position of both of those people. Wow, that was very intense. Tell us what you were doing and what were you thinking about as you were doing both the work you did, because the most of the work was with the first partner, and then what you did with the second partner. Help us understand conceptually what you were trying to do.
Right. Well, at first, I was just trying to understand what was her motives, right? What
Right.
was driving this? And it does sound like, and we didn't get all the way through it, but it does sound like she was she was starving.
Mhm.
And I do use that metaphor at times. Yeah, you were hungry and you stole ice cream, which is not real life. That's another piece, is that people get mixed up in affairs about whether it's, this tastes so good, this is wonderful, but
Right.
it's not real life.
Right.
If all you eat is ice cream, you become a very sick person,
Right.
right? You do need fruits and vegetables and other kinds of things. So I was, trying, and I would have moved into that, but I was trying to assess. Then once he had a reaction, clearly he is afraid of being blamed. And usually, oftentimes, I would have kind of done that last little piece, maybe even earlier before
Yeah.
I started doing the assessment. Um, but that can come up. And I reiterate, I believe very strongly that people are responsible for their own behaviors.
Right.
All of us influence each other. You can make it easier or harder to to have your partner have an affair, but you cannot make them have an affair. It doesn't work that way. So I like to early on get the whole issue of who's at fault here out of the way. Because that's the wrong level. Affairs will never get healed at that level. Okay, the wounds will not get healed. I also, with her, because, okay, he's afraid of being blamed. I reassured him. Oftentimes, the other person is going to go into shame, and then they're going to fight shame. They'll either go deep into it or they'll push back. And, well, it was so hard, blah, 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 blah. And it's like both of those responses are destructive. So what I want to do is not make it about who they are. Because who they are is a person who values fidelity. This was an aberration. Okay. Who they are is a person who would never want to do this. And when they come to their kind of right mind, if you can see the impact of it, typically they want to end it. And they feel bad about it and they want to stop. So I want to disconnect who they are with what they've done. I do want to keep the focus. I mean, what they did was very destructive. That doesn't mean that they're a bad person. And in fact, it means they made a serious mistake and everybody got hurt. They got hurt.
Well, you see, and that fits really well with something that I think a lot about with clients that I deal with, especially clients who find themselves having done or doing things that they're not proud of, that are going against their own values, right? We see, I see this a lot in addiction work.
Right, absolutely.
And that one of the things that I really believe, and I think is powerful, and that I just heard you say, is that what we can do as therapists is we can know that we're really trying to talk to and connect with sort of the best version of this person, right? That authentic part of the human being that truly is honest and is caring and is someone who wants to or can live from their values, right?
Or desires to be.
Yeah, I mean, I think that
their core.
Yeah, I mean, except in very, very rare cases of extreme antisocial or extreme narcissism, right? And we're not talking about that. We're talking about more, people who don't fall into those categories. And I just love what you're saying, is because also what I hear you saying is almost like our job is to help them try to have an experience so they can understand that falling into deep shame and living there and experiencing that too much, just being in deep shame, is not going to help them, because shame doesn't really move anyone toward much of anything except for feeling terrible about themselves. And I've even found that people who spend too much time in shame are actually more likely to do it again.
Absolutely. Shame tends to block growth. And it's certainly, so whether it's personal block growth, in terms of being able to know how to manage their emotions in a healthy way, which you see in addictions, you see it in a lot of places. Shame blocks all that. Shame also blocks relational healing, because when somebody goes into shame, in this scenario, for example, if she had dropped into shame at that moment, there's no way for her to be with him when I start opening up his pain.
Right.
Part of what heals this for the injured partner is when the injured partner experiencing the pain around the betrayal, which is fundamentally a disconnection, experiencing that pain when the other person is, this time when they're in the pain, with them.
Yes.
Okay. Affairs are disconnections. They're violations. They disconnect. The pain of that disconnection is horrible and very difficult. If the partner is with them as they go through that pain, empathizing, understanding, In other words, if I have connection around that pain, fundamentally, that is the key ingredient in healing.
You see, yes. And I actually have found that when I've watched quite a bit of my own tape, as a tape of me doing therapy, and also of some of the folks that I work with and I supervise. Sometimes we'll just turn off the volume and try to look at what's happening just through body language.
Mhm.
And I've seen exactly what you're talking about, Scott, that so often when you see someone dropping into shame, like in this example, right? If this woman had been dropping deeply into shame, and
Mhm.
you might be trying to help her not go into it, but she's just going down into it, right?
Mhm.
That it's almost like what she would be doing is what I'm doing now, which is if I'm looking away from my partner,
Yep.
I'm looking down, I've got a terrible look on my face, I'm so sad, and what I'm feeling is I'm so terrible, and this is so horrible, and I'm a piece of this, and right, when actually my partner is right here, right? And if we can help that person sort of what I call sidestep the shame, but access maybe regret and
Mhm.
access empathy,
Right.
right?
Mhm.
And so it becomes, yes, I'm deeply saddened and I am feeling terrible, but I'm looking to you because I want to be there for you even just right now, right? Because for me, Scott, I think that shame can be a very inward looking, sort of very almost selfish, not meaning to be selfish, but
No,
it
but
takes
it is about self.
it takes you out of connection from your partner.
Exactly. It takes you out of connection with your partner. It also takes you out of connection with who you really are in terms of your value system and your core self.
Right.
Because shame is, I am a horrible, terrible, bad person. And at a certain point, another part of you is going to flip and rebel against that. Then it's easy to start looking for who else to blame, all of which is at the wrong level. You know, Sue Johnson quotes, Einstein is saying problems are rarely solved at the level that created them.
Right.
And the level of who's to blame or who's at fault or who's the bad guy is a very destructive level. And that will never heal anything.
Right.
So you have to help people out. I do sometimes when people drop into shame, I do talk about, I will point it out and say, what happens here is you're going into this, I'm a horrible person, and that shuts you down. It's hard for you to see your partner.
Yeah.
It all becomes about you. And
Yeah.
it's untrue
Yeah.
because you get mixed up between who you are and what you've done.
Right.
You've done is not who you are. Now, when people do bad things, if you do a bad thing and you really, once you kind of recognize it, you can do one of two things. You can either change your behavior so that it aligns with your inner value system, your inner light, your inner desires, or you can work on changing your value system so that it aligns with your behaviors. You're here trying to align your behaviors with your value system,
Right.
which speaks to your inner goodness.
Yeah. Or the word that jumps out to me is the idea of almost like an inner nobility.
Yeah. Yep. Your inner nobility, whatever way of describing it works for the client. But for them to get in touch with their core self, their value system, whatever it is, their inner nobility, their inner desires around goodness, their inner light, whatever works for them, you can think about it and frame it as you are trying to align your behaviors in with your inner light and repair the damage from your mistakes. That's what you're doing, and that speaks to your inner goodness.
Oh, I love it. Oh, I love it. Well, Scott, we need to quit. I wish we could keep going. I think that one of the next conversations I may want to have with you is see if we can even expand more on shame. And let's talk about what happens in the body. Let's talk about the neurochemical experience in the body of what happens when people have shame, and how can people through therapy have those change moments that I call it, when it seems that people can sometimes shift out of shame and into other places and other emotions that can actually start to be part of the healing.
Yep. Yep. Emotions that can lead them out and heal them. Yep. That's exactly right. Be happy to.
Okay.
It'd be fun to
So,
talk.
again, we've just spent this time with Dr. Scott Woolley. Scott, if people need to or wanted to see your work or get a hold of you, where are you in this world? Do you do websites, et cetera, et cetera?
You know, in some ways, I don't always want to be found. So, and my website's down right now. But certainly if you Google me, Scott R. Woolley, and you put an R in there, you'll most likely get my stuff up. And you can see where I'm doing lectures or doing workshops, those kinds of things. I do like doing workshops, and that's something I expand for, but I'm still a professor, and I'm still a clinic, executive director, and I still have an active practice, and I'm still traveling. So
you've got a lot going on. You've got a lot going on. Well, listen, again, Scott, this was great. I'm highly stimulated and excited about our conversation. So thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. We'll talk with you soon.
Okay. Sounds good. Okay. Ed.